Welcome all. In this video I will explain exceptions, and before that we will quickly repeat a function, and we will write a function that calculates the area of a rectangle. So to write a function we work outside the main function, and we start by defining the data type of its output. And since we want to return the area of the rectangle, we chose here for the data type double. Furthermore, we have to give the function a name. So for example, calculate area rectangle, and then we type here rounded brackets, and between the rounded brackets we place its input of the function. And in this case we have two inputs, namely the width and the height of the rectangle. Like this. And now we have to implement the function, and by calculating the area we have to multiply the width by its height. Yeah, so we can make a variable here named area. So in this variable we store the area of the rectangle, and the area is width times height. And finally we return the value in area. So this is the function to calculate the area of a rectangle, and to call this function we have to use the name of this function here. So we can type the name of the function. So calculate area rectangle, then rounded brackets, and between the rounded brackets we have to put the inputs of the function. So for example 10 and 20. So this statement here calls the function here above. However, this function returns the area, but we do not do anything with it yet. So for example, what we can do is print it on the console, and therefore we have to use cout here. Yeah, so the result which this function returns is being printed on the console by using cout. So if I run this program here now, we see it prints 200 because 10 times 20 is 200. However, let's try another values. So for example, minus 10. So let's see what the output is now. We see it prints minus 200, which is strange because the area cannot be negative. So often what you want when you create a function is also check its inputs and see whether they are correct or not. And in this case we want to check whether the width and the height are both positive numbers, because width and height cannot be negative. So how we can do that is, at the beginning of the function we can check the inputs and check whether they are correct or wrong. So we can check if width is smaller than 0 or height is smaller than 0. So if we find a width or height that's smaller than 0, so it's negative, then we throw an exception. And what happens here is that when I throw an exception, the function stops and returns to the place where the function is called. So in this case, so when we call the function here, we jump here to the function, and when the width or height is negative, then the program enters the if statement and therefore throws an exception, and then it will return from this function. So from this spot it will return to the place where the function is called, so this position here, and then the exception must be catched, which we will see later on. So let's first see how we can throw an exception. So therefore we have to create a data type for the exception. So to do that we type here clause, so that's a keyword in C++. Later on we will cover clauses more, so we will see what it exactly is, but for now you just have to know that you have to type the keyword clause here, and now the name of the exception. So for example, negative value, and then you have to type curly brackets and you end with a semicolon. And here at this location you type throw negative value this way. So again, when we find a width or a height that's negative, so smaller than 0, then this type of exception is being thrown, and from this location, it will return from this function to the location where the function is called. So for example, at this location here. So let's run this program and see what happens. So what you see now is that the program crashes. So you see here it prints unhandled exception. So the exception is not handled yet. And the type of exception is negative value. So what happens here is that at this location, so at line 23, we call the function calculate area rectangle. We pass the inputs -10 and 20. So width becomes -10, height becomes 20. And here on line 11, we check if the width or height is smaller than 0. Well, the width is -10, so the width is negative, therefore it enters the if statement. And here it throws a negative value. So from this location, it throws an exception from this function and returns to the location where the function is called, so at line 23 here. However, we do not do anything with the exception yet. So what we have to do is catch the exception, and so we can handle the exception correctly. And how we do that is as follows. So we use a try block here. And under the try, we make a catch block. And the type of exception that we want to catch is negative value. Like this. And when we catch an exception of negative value, we can print something. For example, a negative value is used for the width or height. So what a try catch does is as follows. So the program always enters the try block, and then it tries to execute the statements in the try block. Yeah, so we can also add more statements here. However, for now, we only have this statement here. And when one of these statements in the try block throws an exception of type negative value, then it jumps from that location to the catch block. So for example, if I make one statement here more, and now let's run this program. We see it prints a negative value is used for the width or height. So what happens here on line 24, we call the function. Well, the function throws an exception of type negative value. So therefore it jumps from this location to the catch. So the exception is being catched, and then it will execute all the statements here in the catch block. And next the program will continue from below the try catch block, so at this location here. So let's change the input from -10 to 10 and run the program again. So now you see it prints 200 because we call the function here calculate area rectangle with inputs 10 and 20. We print the result of this function, which is 200, because 10 times 20 is 200. And then on line 25, we print 3 dots, which we also see here on the console. And as long in the try block, there is no statement that throws an exception of type negative value, then it will execute all the statements, and then it jumps below the try catch block and will continue from this point on further with the program. So that's it for this video. In this video we have seen exceptions.